All right, and continuing with assignment 7 and our spot illustration, I'd like you to go to the Canvas page, go to links, and download the digital and coloring painting handout. Just click on it. It will download a PDF. And this is what that PDF looks like. And we are going to focus on this gray rectangle right here, which is, I call it my digital coloring primer. And we'll look at some of the painting tips when we get into digital painting in assignment 9. But understanding digital coloring has to come first before we can understand digital painting. So digital coloring is like stained glass. That's how I've always kind of thought of it. You need a clean outline before you can play with the color inside of a shape. So how do we get our clean outlines? Well, you can sketch. You can sketch in the computer. You can sketch in your sketchbook. You can scan your sketch. You can ink over it physically and scan the inks, which is often what I do for more complicated designs. Or you can take the sketch into Illustrator and digitally ink over the top of it, which is what I'll show in this demo and have been showing with my achievement badge illustration. And there's a variety of techniques. I'll try to show you different ones and see if there are any you want to try out that you think would be appropriate for your vision. What's nice about inking in Illustrator is you can get perfectly symmetrical, perfectly smooth, perfectly technical lines. And when you want that look, that's really the only tool to use. But if you want it to be a little bit more hand done, more gestural like this is, you can ink it by hand, or you can digitally paint it in Photoshop and then live trace it in Illustrator. Or you could use some of these tools in Illustrator that are more free form, like the Blob brush tool. Once we have a clean vector, just like we did with our logos, we will save it as an EPS file, a portable vector file, and we will move it at very high resolution. I'll usually do 450 pixels per inch for this, into Photoshop at a size that's good enough for a poster. So maybe at minimum 8 by 10, but maybe something more like 11 by 14, or even larger. And we can print up to 17 by 22 inches, which is kind of perfect for the art standard format of 16 by 20 inches. So once we have that line work, it will scale up perfectly because it's a vector. Then in Photoshop, we're going to learn how to digitally color behind. Yes, you can color in Illustrator, but you can't get all of these soft transitions and things nearly as easily in Illustrator. And as long as we have clean vector outlines, the vector is doing its job to keep every edge really smooth. So we're going to learn how to flat color and do the vector line work, hopefully by the end of today's class. But that requires we have a sketch we're working from. Then at the beginning of next class and through a lot of next class before this assignment's due, we're going to learn about duotone coloring, which is where you split your local flat color. So in the lemon here, lemons are yellow. At least this lemon is yellow. Doesn't matter if it's in the closet where there's no light, or on the kitchen table with direct sunlight, or whether it's lit from the side, its color is yellow. So that is the local color. It's the color inherent to the object. So flat color just takes a pretty saturated version of that and fills it in. It's like Charlie Brown's shirt, right? Or his skin color. Those are local colors. Once you start to choose a lighting direction, so say it's lit from above at a kitchen table, then you can split that local flat color into two tones. That's why it's called duotone. And you want a lighter than the local and a darker than the local. And generally both of those will be less saturated, less intense than the local color would be on its own. So a simple way of thinking of duotone is you take the local color, you add white to it for the highlights, you add black to it for the shadows, and you get this. These are tints and tones of the local color. This is what's called hard edge duotone, or sometimes called cut edge, and sometimes called cell shaded, because this is what a lot of animation uses. So even though you have a clean black outline, the coloring is split by an even cut, by a hard edge division. So you only have two very distinct tones there. But that's not the only way you can do duotone. Once you split your local color into two different values, a lighter than the local color and a darker than the local color value, you can also soften that gradation between them. And so you can work from the lightest yellow possible to the darkest yellow possible and get, a whole value scale. And that's still duotone color because you're still working from one local color and just splitting it into its different values. Now that's as far as most digital coloring goes. But if you wanted to go beyond duotone coloring, beyond flat coloring, beyond hard edge, you can add other colors into the local color. And this has to do with external color theory. So if the yellow lemon is also under yellow light, then it's going to have purple in its shadows because of the color theory. So if you really want to make this yellow look intensely yellow, it's good to add the complement. And these are just painting techniques. The problem is if you add purple, as I've done here, and green and other colors to this local color, and you can do the same thing in your skin. You can add purples and greens into a skin tone, right? As you can kind of see in here. That is called full spectrum color, which basically means you can use any color anywhere. There's no rules. The problem is it looks a little weird with a black outline because we're used to seeing full spectrum stuff when there is no outline because that's how real life is. But with the outline, it feels like overkill a little bit. So what do? Well, then we're also going to learn how you can change the color of your outline. You do not need to keep your outline, especially if it's a vector, it's very easy to mess with. You don't need to keep it solid black. You can make it a certain color. You can thin it out or even allow highlights and things to go on top of it. And so those are called color holds. When you take some sort of color and hold it out over the black, you're holding out. So that's called a color hold. And that's how you get these kind of special effects of highlights. And you'd think we'd be done then with our spot illustration. But no, because it's a spot illustration, it needs to be versatile like a logo. And so you want to figure out how it's going to read on different colored backgrounds. So this is how it would read on white, but how would it read on a black background? And so you might add an offset border. That helps with t-shirt designs, with stickers, things like that. And then we're going to even play with color separation. And the reason this is such a high resolution handout is so you can zoom in and see the differences between kind of smooth pixel-based image and the printed image, which uses this separation of CMYK dots to give you the mechanical printed potential, which I'll use in a lot of my professional work because it not only prints a little bit cleaner and more to my intention if I create the dots, but it also gives it kind of a vintage feel and makes it feel more, part of graphic arts, not trying to compete so much with traditional painting. All right, so that is digital coloring, and it's all outlined in this gray box. I do not require that you do anything special with your illustration. You just want it to be the best possible illustration it can be for your portfolio. So you might choose to spend a lot of time on your line work and then just do flat color, and you like it. It's hard to do good flat color that are the right colors, and that can be enough. Basically, the more complicated your line work, you can put shadows into your line work, you can do all kinds of things. The simpler you can go with your coloring and still have a really nice result. But for this is a very simple line work. So the coloring, in order to turn that lemon around, that starts to get more and more involved. So it just depends where your interests are. So a lot to tackle. How do we apply this to what we've been doing? I'm going to go into my assignment 7 folder here, and we're working off this sketch, but I am choosing to digitally ink this sketch in Illustrator. Though I could also, as I have these materials at the corner of the front table, I could also just ink the sketch and then scan the cleaned inks and live trace that into a vector. I also found color reference that I might want to use because I want to keep the achievement badge referring to the school a little bit, but also being like a little bit like a summer camp. So I found these two images one which, and they also illustrate something else. So this is a very simple image. This is more what my achievement badge is like, fairly clean lines. And then this is an image that has kind of a bird, right? And it has kind of the school colors without that toxic green, which I like to avoid usually in my work. But notice that these both use the same colors, and they're both actually using flat color for the most part. Actually, no, they're not. I take that out. This uses flat color. So the outline has one color, the inside of the hand has one color, this ring has one color, the background has one color, these letters have one color. They don't have variations on those colors. This basically uses those same flat colors, but then builds duotone variations. So you'll see there's not just one blue, there's two blues in the feathers. So if we zoom in and look at that, you see duotone. This is cut edge duotone because you can easily see the distinction. It's not gradated. And then for this kind of tan color, which I like, it splits it into two. For the reds and oranges, it splits those into two. But this is actually flat color with just a colored outline. So there's lots of different ways to approach it. And you can see here where the line work is so complex, the coloring can still be pretty simple. And so these I'm going to use to steal colors from when I'm at that stage for flatting. But right now I'm still working on getting an outline, a vector outline, which can be kind of slow going in Illustrator, but I'm trying to show you these different methods. So to get a really clean technical line, you can simply use the pen tool and then use the stroke. And then as I've shown with the last demo, you can select the stroke. See what layers I have. I think I have most of them locked. And you can say object, path, and then outline. And you can turn your stroke into something that you can modify both sides of. So let me see if I want to unlock this so I can edit it. So you can, now that I have it outlined, I could actually use a variety of tools, but one of my favorite is the pencil tool to redraw this stroke. So if I want it to be thicker here, going down, I could draw that, and then it will change that line. Now I'm trying to do that basic thing here with the Blob brush tool, which I like because each stroke you make adds to the last stroke. And you can control, it's under the brush tool. By double clicking, you can control the size of it. So I'm going to tighten the size because it was getting a little out of control. So I'm going to do it with a variation of maybe 6 points. And then I'm going to continue to draw here. I wish I could tilt the whole screen, but you can't in Illustrator. You can in Photoshop. And this gives me control, thick to thin. And I drew it pretty wobbly, but because I have it set to be more smooth than accurate, it cleans it up for me. And that way I can go really thin at the beginning and then thicken up towards the V. It's an old illustration rule of thickening towards the V. And there's a lot of ways to use Illustrator. My general thinking is get something down and then modify it. Because you're trying to use it as a tool basically for refining. Now they're getting really heavy just because the angle's weird for me. I don't know if I love it, but I'll work with it. And because I want a fairly symmetrical design, I'm only going to go to about halfway with any of these marks. See, I got way off there, but it still did a fairly good job.